Lesson 1. Their actions come with consequences. The avoidance psychological framework operates under the false assumption that relationships exist in a state of perpetual availability. Their mind has been conditioned to believe that people will always return, no matter how poorly they are treated. This deeply rooted belief system crumbles when faced with the finality of someone's departure. The shock to their nervous system is profound as they confront the reality that their behavior has created an irreversible outcome. Their brain struggles to process this new information because it contradicts years of reinforced patterns. The avoidant has grown accustomed to a cycle where their emotional withdrawal is met with increased pursuit from others. This dynamic has taught them that their toxic behavior is not only tolerated, but actually reinforced through the desperate attempts of others to reconnect. When someone walks away permanently, it shatters this illusion and forces them to confront the true weight of their actions. The psychological impact of this lesson penetrates deep into their core belief system. They begin to understand that relationships are not endless wells of patience and forgiveness. The avoidance mind grapples with the concept that some damage cannot be undone, that some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. This realization triggers a cascade of emotions they have spent years suppressing: regret, loss, and the terrifying understanding that their behavior has consequences beyond their control. Their emotional numbness begins to crack as they face the permanence of loss. The avoidant discovers that their assumption of relationship security was built on the goodwill of others, not on their own contributions to the connection. This awareness creates a profound shift in their psychological landscape as they recognize that their actions carry weight and meaning that extends far beyond their immediate emotional comfort. The lesson of permanence forces the avoidant to confront their own mortality in relationships. They realize that every interaction carries the potential to be the last, that every moment of coldness or dismissiveness chips away at something finite and precious. This understanding creates a new framework for evaluating their behavior, one where the consequences extend beyond the immediate moment into the realm of lasting impact. The avoidance nervous system experiences a state of hypervigilance as they process this new reality. Their amygdala, the brain's alarm center, fires continuously as they recognize the magnitude of what they have lost. The stress response floods their body with cortisol and adrenaline, creating a physiological awakening that matches their psychological one. They experience panic attacks, insomnia, and a general sense of existential dread as their mind attempts to process the permanence of their situation. Their cognitive processes undergo a dramatic restructuring as they confront the reality that time cannot be reversed. The avoidance brain, accustomed to operating in a fantasy of endless second chances, must now adapt to the harsh reality of finality. This mental adjustment creates significant psychological distress as they realize that their procrastination in emotional matters has cost them something irreplaceable. The emotional weight of permanence settles into their consciousness like a heavy blanket. They experience waves of grief that wash over them unpredictably, each one carrying the full force of their regret and loss. The avoidant discovers that their emotional suppression techniques are no longer effective against this level of psychological pain. Their usual methods of detachment and denial prove powerless against the stark reality of permanent loss. This lesson fundamentally alters their relationship with time itself. The avoidant begins to understand that moments of connection are finite resources that, once wasted, cannot be reclaimed. They realize that their assumption of endless opportunity was a luxury they could only afford, while someone else was willing to provide it. Now, faced with the absence of that person, they must confront the scarcity of genuine human connection. The psychological reverberations of this lesson continue to unfold over weeks and months. The avoidance mind returns repeatedly to moments they could have acted differently, words they could have said, gestures they could have made. This mental rumination becomes a form of psychological torture as they realize that all their regrets are now purely academic. There are no more chances to get it right. Their sleep patterns become disrupted as their subconscious mind processes the full implications of permanence. Dreams become populated with scenarios where they have the opportunity to behave differently, only to wake to the harsh reality that these opportunities no longer exist. The avoidant experiences a form of psychological time travel where they repeatedly revisit moments of potential connection, now understanding their significance too late. Lesson 2. Love is not unconditional endurance. The avoidant's distorted understanding of love becomes glaringly apparent when faced with someone who refuses to accept mistreatment. Their psychological conditioning has taught them that love means endless tolerance for poor behavior, that genuine care manifests as a willingness to endure toxicity without complaint. This belief system is shattered when someone demonstrates that real love includes self-respect and healthy boundaries. Their mind reels as they confront the concept that love without reciprocity is not sustainable. The avoidant has operated under the assumption that their emotional unavailability would be balanced by the other person's emotional overavailability. They discover that healthy individuals do not sacrifice their well-being to maintain relationships with those who refuse to engage authentically. This realization triggers a deep psychological crisis, as their fundamental understanding of love relationships is called into question. The emotional impact of this lesson forces the avoidant to examine their own capacity for love. They begin to understand that their version of love has been selfish and one-sided, expecting maximum emotional investment while offering minimum emotional return. The departure of someone who refuses to accept this imbalance teaches them that genuine love requires mutual respect, effort, and emotional presence from both parties. Their psychological defenses are challenged as they recognize that their behavior has been demanding unconditional love while offering conditional presence. The avoidance mind struggles to integrate this new understanding because it requires them to acknowledge their own shortcomings in the realm of emotional reciprocity. They realize that expecting others to love them despite their toxic behavior while withholding their own full emotional engagement is fundamentally unfair and unsustainable. This lesson penetrates their consciousness with the understanding that love is not a bottomless resource that can be taken without giving. The avoidant discovers that healthy relationships require emotional investment from both sides, that love flourishes through mutual care and withers under neglect. Their psychological framework begins to shift as they recognize that demanding unconditional endurance while offering conditional affection is a recipe for relationship destruction. The depth of this realization creates a profound emotional awakening in the avoidant. They begin to understand that their pattern of emotional withdrawal followed by expectation of continued devotion is not only unrealistic but also deeply harmful to those who care about them. This awareness forces them to confront the possibility that their understanding of love has been fundamentally flawed from the beginning. The avoidant's nervous system experiences intense dysregulation as they process the collapse of their love mythology. Their attachment system, formed in early childhood, begins to show cracks as they realize that their model of love relationships has been based on exploitation rather than mutual care. This creates significant psychological distress as they must rebuild their understanding of what healthy love actually looks like. Their emotional regulation systems go into overdrive as they confront the reality of their own lovelessness. The avoidant realizes that their inability to love fully has been masked by their expectation that others would compensate for their emotional deficits. This recognition creates waves of shame and self-loathing that threaten to overwhelm their already fragile psychological defenses. The cognitive dissonance between their expectations and reality creates a mental whirlwind that leaves them feeling disoriented and lost. The avoidance mind struggles to reconcile their belief that they deserved unconditional love with the reality that they offered conditional presence. This internal conflict generates significant psychological tension that manifests as anxiety, depression, and a general sense of existential confusion. They begin to understand that their version of love was actually a form of emotional parasitism, where they extracted care and attention while providing little in return. This realization forces them to confront the uncomfortable truth that they have been emotional consumers rather than contributors. The psychological weight of this understanding creates a profound sense of guilt and remorse that penetrates every aspect of their being. The avoidance concept of self-worth undergoes a dramatic reconstruction as they realize that their value in relationships cannot be taken for granted. They discover that love is not an entitlement, but a privilege that must be earned through consistent emotional investment and authentic presence. This understanding challenges their entire identity structure and forces them to rebuild their sense of self from the ground up. Their emotional intelligence begins to develop for the first time as they recognize the complexity of human emotional needs. The avoidant starts to understand that love involves sacrifice, compromise, and the willingness to be uncomfortable for the sake of another person's well-being. This awareness creates both hope and terror as they realize how much emotional growth they will need to undertake to become capable of genuine love. The psychological impact of this lesson extends beyond their understanding of romantic relationships to encompass all their human connections. The avoidant begins to see patterns of emotional taking without giving across all their relationships, friendships, family connections, and professional interactions. This broader recognition creates an overwhelming sense of the work they need to do to become an emotionally healthy individual. Lesson 3. Self-protection through walls creates self-imposed prison. The avoidant's elaborate system of emotional barriers faces its ultimate test when someone walks away rather than attempting to scale their walls. Their psychological architecture, built on the premise that emotional distance equals safety, suddenly reveals itself as a prison of their own making. The departure of someone significant forces them to confront the isolation they have created in the name of self-protection. Their mind begins to unravel the complex web of defenses they have constructed over years of emotional conditioning. The avoidant realizes that their walls, designed to keep pain out, have also kept genuine connection at bay. This awareness creates a profound psychological crisis, as they recognize that their protective measures have become the very source of their suffering. The irony of their situation becomes painfully clear. In trying to avoid emotional pain, they have created a deeper, more persistent form of suffering through isolation. The emotional impact of this lesson reverberates through their entire psychological structure. The avoidant discovers that their fear of vulnerability has robbed them of the very experiences that make life meaningful. They begin to understand that emotional safety cannot be achieved through distance and detachment, but rather through the courage to engage authentically with others despite the inherent risks involved. Their nervous system, accustomed to the false sense of security provided by emotional walls, goes into overdrive as they confront the reality of their self-imposed isolation. The avoidant realizes that their protective mechanisms have created a life of emotional poverty, where the absence of pain has come at the cost of the absence of joy, connection, and authentic human experience. This realization forces a complete re-evaluation of their psychological strategy for navigating relationships. The avoidant begins to understand that their walls have not protected them from heartbreak, but have guaranteed it by ensuring that meaningful connections cannot take root and flourish. They recognize that their emotional barriers have created a paradox where the very thing they sought to protect, their emotional well-being, has been compromised by their protective measures. The depth of this understanding creates a seismic shift in their psychological landscape. The avoidant confronts the reality that their emotional walls have not only failed to provide the security they promised, but have actively worked against their deepest needs for connection and understanding. This awareness opens the door to the possibility that vulnerability, rather than being a weakness to be avoided, might actually be the key to the authentic relationships they have always secretly craved. Their psychological framework begins to crack under the weight of this realization. The avoidant discovers that their elaborate system of emotional protection has been built on a false premise, that safety comes from distance rather than from the courage to be authentic and present in relationships. This understanding challenges everything they believed about emotional survival and opens their mind to new possibilities for genuine connection. The avoidance identity structure undergoes a complete deconstruction as they realize that their entire personality has been built around avoiding authentic connection. Their sense of self, constructed over decades of emotional withdrawal, begins to crumble as they recognize that their protective strategies have actually prevented them from becoming a fully realized individual. This creates an identity crisis of massive proportions as they must rebuild their sense of who they are from the foundation up. Their emotional regulation systems, calibrated for a life of minimal emotional engagement, struggle to process the intensity of feelings that arise when their walls begin to crumble. The avoidant experiences overwhelming waves of emotion that they have no framework for managing. Years of suppressed feelings come flooding back, creating a psychological tsunami that threatens to destroy what little emotional stability they have managed to maintain. The physiological impact of wall removal manifests in their body as well as their mind. The avoidant experiences panic attacks, heart palpitations, and other somatic symptoms as their nervous system attempts to adjust to a new reality without the familiar comfort of emotional barriers. Their body, accustomed to the relative calm of emotional numbness, rebels against the intensity of authentic feeling. They begin to understand that their walls were not just psychological constructs, but had become physical barriers as well. The avoidant recognizes that their body language, facial expressions, and even their breathing patterns have been unconsciously designed to keep others at a distance. This awareness forces them to confront how deeply their avoidance patterns have penetrated every aspect of their being. The social consequences of their wall building become apparent as they realize how their defensive postures have affected every relationship in their life. The avoidant begins to see that their emotional barriers have not only prevented romantic intimacy, but have also limited their ability to form meaningful friendships, maintain family connections, and even engage authentically in professional relationships. Their concept of strength undergoes a complete transformation as they recognize that their emotional walls were actually expressions of weakness rather than protection. The avoidant realizes that true strength comes from the courage to be vulnerable, to risk being hurt, for the possibility of genuine connection. This understanding challenges their entire worldview and forces them to reconsider what it means to be emotionally strong. The psychological prison they have created becomes increasingly apparent as they understand that their walls have not just kept others out, but have kept themselves trapped within. The avoidant realizes that their emotional barriers have prevented them from accessing their own authentic feelings and desires. They have become strangers to themselves, living in a carefully controlled but ultimately empty emotional landscape. Lesson 4. Respect is earned through consistency, not demanded through presence. The avoidant's final and perhaps most crucial lesson involves the complete dismantling of their assumption that respect should be automatic and unconditional. Their psychological conditioning has taught them that their mere presence in someone's life should be enough to command respect and devotion, regardless of how they treat others. When someone walks away, it shatters this entitlement and forces them to confront the reality that respect must be earned through consistent, caring behavior. Their mind struggles to integrate this new understanding because it requires a fundamental shift from entitlement to accountability. The avoidant discovers that their pattern of emotional hot and cold behavior, dismissiveness, and general unavailability has not inspired respect, but has instead eroded it over time. This realization creates a profound psychological crisis, as they recognize that their behavior has been systematically destroying the very thing they expected to receive automatically. The emotional impact of this lesson penetrates deep into their core identity structure. The avoidant begins to understand that respect is not a right to be claimed, but a privilege to be earned through consistent demonstration of care, consideration, and emotional presence. They realize that their sporadic moments of affection or attention cannot compensate for extended periods of emotional neglect and dismissiveness. Their psychological defenses crumble as they confront the reality that their behavior has been fundamentally disrespectful to those who cared about them. The avoidant discovers that expecting respect while consistently demonstrating disrespect through their actions is not only unrealistic, but also deeply hypocritical. This awareness forces them to examine their own behavior with unprecedented honesty and accountability. The lesson of earned respect challenges the avoidant's entire approach to relationships. They begin to understand that meaningful connections are built on mutual respect that grows through consistent positive interactions, not on the assumption that care should be given regardless of treatment received. This understanding creates a new framework for evaluating their own behavior and its impact on others. Their emotional numbness begins to dissolve as they face the reality that their inconsistent, dismissive behavior has systematically undermined any foundation for genuine respect in their relationships. The avoidant realizes that respect cannot be demanded or expected, but must be cultivated through reliable, caring actions over time. This awareness forces them to confront the uncomfortable truth that their behavior has been working actively against their own relationship goals. The depth of this realization creates a profound shift in their psychological approach to relationships. The avoidant discovers that their pattern of emotional unavailability, followed by expectation of continued devotion, has been fundamentally disrespectful to those who chose to invest in them. They begin to understand that respect is a two-way street that requires consistent emotional investment from both parties. Their mind grapples with the concept that their presence alone has no inherent value if it comes with emotional unavailability, dismissiveness, and general disregard for the other person's emotional needs. The avoidant realizes that showing up physically while being absent emotionally is actually more disrespectful than complete absence, as it creates false hope while delivering consistent disappointment. This lesson forces the avoidant to confront their own sense of entitlement and the ways it has poisoned their relationships. They begin to understand that expecting others to respect them while consistently demonstrating disrespect through their behavior is not only unreasonable but also deeply damaging to those who tried to maintain connection despite poor treatment. The psychological impact of this final lesson is transformative. The avoidant discovers that respect is the foundation upon which all healthy relationships are built, and that foundation must be laid brick by brick through consistent, caring actions rather than assumed to exist simply because they desire it. This understanding opens the door to the possibility of genuine change and growth in their future relationships, should they choose to embrace the difficult work of becoming someone worthy of the respect they have always expected to receive automatically. The avoidant's narcissistic tendencies become glaringly apparent as they realize how their sense of entitlement has shaped every interaction. They begin to understand that their expectation of respect without reciprocation is a form of emotional narcissism that has damaged everyone who tried to love them. This recognition creates waves of shame and self-disgust that force them to confront the ugly truth about their character. Their cognitive patterns undergo a complete overhaul as they realize that their mental framework has been based on taking rather than giving. The avoidant discovers that their thoughts have been consistently focused on what they could extract from relationships rather than what they could contribute. This awareness forces them to develop new patterns of thinking that prioritize mutual benefit over personal gain. The emotional labor they have demanded from others without reciprocation becomes apparent as they understand the toll their behavior has taken on those who cared about them. The avoidant realizes that they have been emotional parasites, consuming the care and attention of others while offering nothing substantive in return. This recognition creates overwhelming guilt and remorse that penetrates every aspect of their consciousness. Their understanding of reciprocity develops for the first time as they recognize that healthy relationships require balanced exchange of emotional energy. The avoidant begins to understand that respect flows both ways and must be continuously earned through consistent, caring actions. This awareness challenges their entire relationship philosophy and forces them to rebuild their approach to human connection from the ground up. The avoidant's sense of self-worth becomes tied to their actions rather than their mere existence for the first time. They realize that their value as a person is demonstrated through their behavior toward others, not through their internal sense of superiority or specialness. This understanding creates both anxiety and hope as they recognize that they have the power to become worthy of respect through conscious effort and behavioral change. Their emotional maturity begins to develop as they understand that respect is not a feeling that can be demanded, but a response that must be earned. The avoidant starts to recognize that their immature expectation of automatic respect has prevented them from developing the emotional skills necessary to actually deserve it. This awareness marks the beginning of their potential journey toward genuine emotional growth and relationship competence, the peace you get when walking away. The decision to walk away from toxic avoidant behavior creates an immediate shift in the emotional landscape of the person who chooses their own well-being. Their nervous system begins to regulate itself for the first time in months or years, as the constant hypervigilance required to navigate emotional inconsistency finally subsides. The stress hormones that flooded their body during endless cycles of pursuit and rejection start to normalize, allowing their natural emotional equilibrium to return. Their mental energy, previously consumed by trying to decode mixed signals and manage someone else's emotional instability, becomes available for personal growth and self-reflection. The cognitive load of constantly analyzing every interaction for signs of warmth or rejection lifts like a fog, revealing mental clarity they had forgotten was possible. Their thoughts become their own again, no longer dominated by the exhausting task of trying to understand or fix someone who refuses to engage authentically. The emotional freedom that comes with walking away manifests as a profound sense of relief that penetrates every aspect of their being. They discover that their own emotional needs, so long suppressed in service of trying to maintain an impossible connection, begin to resurface with startling clarity. The person realizes they had been living in a state of emotional starvation, accepting crumbs while believing they were receiving a feast. Their self-respect begins to rebuild itself organically as they recognize the courage it took to prioritize their own emotional health over the false hope of eventual reciprocation. The decision to walk away becomes a powerful affirmation of their own worth, a declaration that they deserve consistent care and authentic presence rather than conditional attention and emotional unavailability. The peace that emerges is not the absence of feeling, but the presence of emotional safety within themselves. They discover that their emotional well-being was never dependent on the avoidant's willingness to engage, but rather on their own willingness to protect and nurture their psychological health. This realization creates a profound sense of empowerment as they understand that their happiness was always within their control. Their sleep patterns improve dramatically as the anxiety of wondering when the next emotional withdrawal will occur disappears. Dreams become peaceful rather than populated with scenarios of trying to reconnect or repair damage that was never theirs to fix. The person awakens refreshed, no longer dreading the emotional labor that each day previously required. The social energy they had been pouring into a bottomless well becomes available for relationships that offer genuine reciprocity and emotional presence. They begin to recognize healthy relationship patterns that they had forgotten existed. Relationships where care flows both ways and emotional availability is consistent rather than sporadic. Their intuitive abilities, numbed by the gaslighting effect of intermittent reinforcement, begin to sharpen again. They trust their emotional instincts and recognize red flags that they had previously ignored or rationalized away. This renewed connection to their inner wisdom creates confidence in their ability to make healthy relationship choices moving forward. The person discovers that walking away was not giving up on love, but giving up on accepting less than love. They realize that true connection requires mutual investment, that healthy relationships feel safe rather than chaotic, and that they deserve someone who shows up consistently rather than someone who expects credit for minimal effort. This understanding transforms their entire approach to relationships, setting new standards based on respect, reciprocity, and authentic emotional engagement.